Hey y'all, TRG here, and welcome back to another video. And in this video, I'll be going over a massive Arctic blast that will impact much of the country this weekend into early next week. And I'll also go over a damaging wind event across the northeastern US for tomorrow, and a brief tornado being possible across the northwestern US for tomorrow. Let's go right on into today's video. So we're going to start here with your satellite imagery from a couple hours ago, about noon Eastern time when it was day across much of this sector. We're going to start with looking at this low pressure system up here in Newfoundland. Now this is actively making landfall, but as of a few hours ago, this was actually a very strong high in category 1 or low in category 2 equivalent low pressure. Now, obviously, it wasn't actually a hurricane because it has a front attached to it, but the wind speeds this system is bringing over Newfoundland right now actually is equivalent to that of a high in Cat 1 or low in Cat 2 hurricane. And it will be making landfall with a very low millibar, probably a millibar right around the mid 940 range. Here's our satellite from about an hour ago, and we have a very weak low pressure system that's beginning to form up here in eastern Montana and western North Dakota, and this will traverse across the northern and northeastern US, strengthening as it progresses and really strengthen as it gets off the coastline here of the northeastern US. And as it strengthens, probably late tomorrow evening into the overnight hours, that's when we'll have a pretty high risk for some damaging wind gusts, potentially upwards of 70 miles per hour across the northeastern US. There's also a strong low pressure beginning to form up here with an atmospheric river, and that is going to be impacting the northwestern US going into tomorrow, potentially bringing a tornado or two being a possibility, as well as some very heavy rain and damaging winds being possible across the northwestern US for tomorrow. So taking a look at the simulated wind gusts, this is what's about happening right now across the northeastern US. That strong low pressure across Newfoundland is obviously bringing some gusty winds to the northeastern US for today into tonight, but that will very much decrease with time as we go into tomorrow morning. Wind gusts will be very, very weak, if not barely even noticeable. And then as we go into tomorrow afternoon, you'll see these wind gusts really begin to increase right about 4 p.m. here, and we really start to see a lot stronger wind gusts across areas like Buffalo, New York, where we normally see those lake effect snowfall events, and as well as back down towards Long Island, we'll probably see some wind gusts as early as about 4 p.m., maybe 3 p.m. tomorrow. And then pushing this into the overnight hours here, this is about 11 p.m. tomorrow. That's when our wind gusts will be the worst across much of the northeastern U.S., much of New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, all these areas, New Hampshire, are going to be getting in a lot of wind gusts here going into the overnight hours tomorrow night into Thursday morning. And you could see here going into Thursday morning, that's the highest risk of 60 to 70 mile per hour winds being possible there, mainly across the coastal areas of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and also going into Connecticut and Rhode Island, but could even see some wind gusts upwards of 60 to 70 miles per hour, maybe even well inland across southern Vermont and western Massachusetts going very late tomorrow into Thursday morning. But thankfully, this low pressure, as it strengthens, it's going to be moving offshore here, the New England states, so those highest wind gusts upwards of 80 miles per hour will be well removed from any land. Before we dive on into the rest of today's video, I ask that you guys haven't already, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with your family, friends, social media, and also consider subscribing with the notification bell set to all so you know when I go live or upload another video. Let's go right back on into today's video. So let's talk about the northwestern US. Well, going into tomorrow morning, we're going to begin to see impacts on the coastal areas. Wind gusts could be as high as 50 miles per hour, specifically in southwestern Oregon. And then moving forward beyond that time frame into tomorrow afternoon, we're going to see this traverse further across the Rockies there, and higher elevations could see wind gusts upwards of 60 to 70 miles per hour. Coastal areas upwards of about 30 to 40 mile per hour wind gusts. Going into tomorrow evening and tomorrow night, we'll continue with those wind gusts upwards of 40 to 50 miles per hour across the coastal areas. Specifically, western Oregon seems to be the hot spot for those highest wind gusts. And then going into the overnight hours tomorrow night into Thursday morning, those wind gusts will subside. Looking at simulated reflectivity, we're going to push it back all the way into about now. So this is generally what our radar should look like right about now. And you're seeing those heavier bands begin to push across southwestern Oregon. So that's where your wind gusts will arrive at first. And then watch as we go throughout the overnight hours, you'll see, especially going towards about, this is about 1, 2 a.m. tomorrow morning, the rest of that atmospheric river really starts to push eastward, and that's why those wind gusts all begin to increase, specifically across western Oregon and western California going into tomorrow morning. Then going on into tomorrow afternoon, we will actually see this rain pick up even more, and there is a chance we could see a few tornadoes. 1 or 2 tornadoes will be possible, especially across those coastal areas here, but maybe even a little bit more inland as well going going into tomorrow evening. So we do want to keep an eye on that. It looks like the main hotspot should be, once again, Western Oregon, maybe into Central Oregon as well. So really want to keep an eye on that for a spin-up brief tornado or two. And rainfall totals will be very significant across these areas. Northwestern California, southwestern Oregon, you could see upwards of 5 to 6 inches of rainfall being possible when this is all said and done going into Thursday afternoon. So definitely significant flash flooding will be a possibility, with widespread flash flooding seemingly likely for tomorrow. Now let's go ahead and dive on into the GFS 500 millibar wind speeds here. You can see this very large trough. That's what's going to help aid with the potential for damaging wind gusts for tomorrow across the northeastern U.S. And you can see that very large trough across the northwestern U.S. aiding with that atmospheric river. We also have a very strong high pressure across the southwestern Gulf, so that may be providing our drier and a little bit warmer conditions across the south central U.S. Going into Friday, this is definitely going to change here. Looks like a completely different pattern now, with a very large but very subtle positively tilted trough here entering portions of the central U.S. And Friday looks to be the potential for severe weather, possibly a pretty large area for severe weather, all the way up from the Ohio Valley all the way back down into the south central United States. And we could even see some significant severe weather, including a few tornadoes across Mississippi, Tennessee, and even into eastern Arkansas. But it definitely does depend how this trough looks going into Friday afternoon and evening, because if it is less favorable for convection, we may see a decently favorable environment, but there's a chance not many storms do fire. But I do think we will have a chance for a pretty widespread severe weather event, and I think many people will see low and severe weather, but if we can get some storms to fire in that area, like I said, Mississippi, Tennessee, eastern Arkansas, we could see some significant severe weather, including a brief tornado or two and significant damaging wind gust. And then going on into Saturday, this may continue across portions of the far eastern and southeastern United States, and even going into Sunday, this may be much of the same case. Sunday, November 9th, you'll see this huge trough begin to build across much of the U.S., and this is what's going to help aid with that blast of freezing cold air going into this weekend. And this blast will stick around, so Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday will continue with some of the coldest weather we've seen across the central and U.S. ever since probably February and March earlier this year. And we'll continue with this active pattern probably through much of at least the middle and end of November. So I do think we'll see another big Arctic blast, maybe one or two. Probably not as big as this first one, though. You'll see in just a minute how cold those temperatures may be able to get. And we'll probably end up with another chance for severe weather sometime towards the middle or end of November as well, as that more active jet stream does set up. So definitely watching for a more active period of severe weather and colder weather across much of the U.S., mainly the central and eastern U.S. going through November, and also heightened snowfall potential across the northern and northeastern U.S. But back out here across the eastern and central U.S., it seems like we're still going to remain pretty dry for November and probably flipping between cool and warm temperatures. So we'll see if we can get any overlap of those cold temperatures and maybe a bit more of a favorable system for snowfall, but I wouldn't expect much snow if you're in that pink area going through November. It seems like much of our snow is probably going to stick up towards the northern and northeastern U.S. for November. However, of course, like we mentioned in our winter forecast, if you want to go watch that, you can. It's going to end up changing, and we'll see a lot more snow further off to the south going into late December and January, February, even into early March. Speaking of snow, let's look at the GFS precipitation type. There's a chance for some flurries in some higher elevations across Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, even into North Dakota. Going into tomorrow, this will continue across portions of southern Ontario, southwestern Quebec, and even the higher elevations there in the far northeastern U.S. You could see that purple 540 line. That's generally where about your freezing point is. Then going on into Thursday, you could see some snow right along that 540 line there across southern Canada, even some backside snow there across the northeastern U.S., as well as in the higher elevations of the Northwestern Rockies. Friday's where things begin to get a little bit more interesting here, as we could see some flurries across North Dakota, Montana, some heavier snow still across southern Ontario. But the main thing to pay attention to on Friday is actually this portion of the 540 line. See how that's starting to kind of notch down, and we have a little weak low pressure beginning to form there in southern Canada, northern Montana. That's actually the beginning of our blast of freezing cold air there, starting Friday night into Saturday morning. Watch how this progresses through Saturday. You can see that 540 line is getting very, very far south. Now, the biggest question here is, how much energy is being transferred with this big frigid blast of cold air. Because if there is a lot of energy, look what we got right in here. We do have some snow across South Dakota and even into Iowa and Nebraska going into Saturday night. Pushing that into Sunday morning, that actually transfers into some snow as far south as Kansas, as far south as St. Louis, Missouri, and even some heavier snow across the Midwestern United States going into Sunday afternoon. So depending on how much energy is available out there, we could see some snow potentially even heavy across the Midwestern U.S. and especially the lake effect areas, but maybe even some flurries behind it for Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Illinois. We'll just have to see if we have any precipitation out here at all that is able to fall. But the main area for snow with this is definitely going to be sticking right up in here. So that's the main region to watch for some snowfall going into Saturday and Sunday. And you could see maybe even some heavier lake effect snowfall behind this system. Going into Monday morning, we do also want to watch for any moisture that could be left over still behind this low pressure. So that would be lake effect snowfall up here, lake effect snowfall up here. And I can't tell you how many times events like this has overperformed across the mid-Atlantic. So I would also be watching back down in here for some flurries going into Monday morning on November 10th. Definitely want to keep an eye on that. You could see really the GFS doesn't show much of that being a possibility, but it is something we want to keep an eye on because we can easily end up with a little bit more precipitation than this model run showing, and then we end up with flurries across a much larger area of the U.S. than what the GFS is depicting. Real quick, before we get into temperatures, I do want to mention on Friday our severe threat. Notice how much heavier our precipitation is up here across the northeastern U.S. into the Midwest. Could see some damaging winds across the Ohio Valley going into Friday, but that area of lighter convection actually across Tennessee, Arkansas, and even back into Mississippi and Alabama, that's going to be where our highest threat for severe weather will be going into Friday. But the big question is, does anything actually fire? If we switch really quick over to supercell composite, you could see a pretty favorable environment for all hazards, including a few tornadoes. Then going into Saturday, just isolated damaging winds across the coastal areas in the eastern U.S., even into the southeastern U.S. And then Sunday, same ordeal, isolated severe weather across the coastal areas in the eastern U.S. Now let's talk about some temperatures here. So we're not really going to see anything too crazy until that blast begins to enter the northwestern U.S. Friday. You could see definitely a little bit of a temperature change going into Friday morning here across the Rockies, but that's mainly across the higher elevations. So you could see here Friday night into Saturday morning, here it comes. Look at this big area of freezing cold temperatures here. You can really see it starting to infiltrate portions of southern Canada and the northern U.S. Saturday morning. And then watch this as we go into Sunday morning. It becomes very evident just how far south this is getting. Sunday morning, that freezing point line is very, very far south already. The worst day for these temperatures is probably going to be on a Monday and Tuesday. So this is Sunday morning. You can see we're already into the lower teens across North Dakota, South Dakota, and higher elevations back in Wyoming and southern Canada. Going into Monday morning, you can see just how widespread that is across much of the central and eastern United States. Very, very cold temperatures, still some pockets into the lower teens there across South Dakota and Iowa. And then going into Tuesday morning, this will be really bad for the eastern U.S. Tuesday morning here, much of out here in Ontario and southern Quebec, into the freezing temperatures up there, and then well into the freezing temperatures back out here across the mid-Atlantic and eastern U.S. So very, very cold temperatures expected going into this weekend. All right, y'all, that's going to do it for today's video. I greatly appreciate you watching. Definitely a lot to talk about and keep an eye on in the weather world, but mainly in the form of that snowfall and this big Arctic blast. Friday definitely has my interest across eastern Arkansas, Mississippi, and southwestern western Tennessee. I do believe we could see a bit better of a severe weather threat across that area, depending on if we actually get storms to fire. So definitely watching that area going into Friday for the potential of severe weather. But anyways, that's going to be it for this video. I greatly appreciate you watching once again. Stay safe, watch severe weather, the tropics, and the snowfall. Goodbye.